Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing section D of the English A paper 2, which would be argumentative writing. Okay. All right, so CSEC English A argumentative writing. And you see that I have a photo of a male on the right and a female on the left, and they appear to be having an argument. Now you can't get more fitting than this. Okay. And of course, I have to give credit to Bing Images because that is the source from which I obtained the photo. All right, so this is section D of the CSEC English A paper 2, argumentative writing. So before we even get into actually writing the essay, there are some things that we need to bear in mind. Oftentimes, persuasion and argumentative writing are seen as the same thing, but they're actually different. Yes, they are similar, but yes, they're similar in some regard. Well, they're similar in some regard, they're actually quite different. And how are they different? Well, when it comes to both of them, it is going to come down to the technique and the aim. So argumentative writing aims to prove a point and relies on logic, whereas persuasive writing aims to convince the reader or listener to agree, and it is based on emotion and opinions. Okay, so we can conclude that argumentative writing is objective, whereas persuasive writing or persuasion is going to be subjective. Okay, because when the aim of an argument is to prove a point, not necessarily to get the other person to agree, but it's to prove a point, right? So you would like that person to understand where you're coming from, right? Not necessarily to agree with you, but to understand where you are coming from. Whereas with persuasion, you are trying to get that person to actually agree with you, right? So you're going to employ a lot more subjective methods. Okay, so you will see a lot of companies and businesses employ a lot of persuasion in their marketing because at the end of the day, their goal is to attract as many customers as possible. So if they can play on your emotions, okay, they're going to succeed in convincing you that their product or service is the best. Okay, so that's the difference between argumentative writing and persuasive writing. Arguments rely on logic and argumentative writing is objective, whereas persuasion is subjective and relies on emotions. Okay. All right. Continuing. Very important. So when it comes to argumentative writing, you want to keep the S in the third person. That means he, she, it, they. Unless you're writing a speech. Because if you're writing a speech, then the first person will be more appropriate. But outside of that, stick to the third person point of view. You shouldn't be using the second person because the second person is if you are advertising. And the second person will be like saying, will be using you. No, that's only if you're advertising. But if you're writing an argumentative essay, keep it in the third person point of view. Okay? Given that argumentative essay constitutes formal writing, and formal writing just means that it is going to be used for business, legal, or even academic purposes. But in this case, it will be academic purposes. So you need to avoid contractions and colloquial language. Contractions are seen as informal, and if you don't know what a contraction is, it will be a shortened form of a word. So, for example, let's look at the word cannot, right? Cannot will be shortened to can, right? Don't use can. Spell out your words. right? Contractions are seen as very informal, so it is best to avoid them completely when it comes to argumentative writing. Now, colloquial language, that's just a fancy term for informal language, conversational language, okay? So you should not be using, well, in Barbados, our dialect is based on is English based, but you should not be using dialect when you are writing an argumentative essay. No, keep it in standard English, okay? So yeah. Now, writing the essay. The first thing you should do is give it a title. I mean, this is a detail that is most likely going to be overlooked, but it's a nice touch. And we want to be the best. We want to show the examiners that we are top notch, okay? So give your essay a title, right? And the title can be general topic or it can be phrased as a question based on the line of argument that you have been presented. Because you're going to be presented some line of argument and you're going to have to give your thoughts, okay? So you can also use that as the question. So let me give you an example of the different titles. So if you want to use a general topic, you could say the death penalty. Assuming that you are given a line of argument on the death penalty, okay? The death penalty. Whereas a title phrase as a question could be, should the death penalty be practiced? Right? So both of those can work as titles, right? And those wouldn't be included in your word count, by the way. Okay, this is my personal advice when it comes to the writing the essay. I think that it is very useful for you to jot down your 3 arguments before you even attempt the essay, because this way you have already completed the most difficult part of the essay. Once you already know your arguments, the essay should be easier to write. Yes. And of course, I included you have to choose one side, support or opposition. Do not be arguing both sides. Argue for one. So choose whether you're opposition or you are in support. Okay? There are times where you can come up with arguments for both sides, but you have to flip a coin or something and decide, because you have to choose one side. Whichever side you feel you can present stronger arguments, then you choose that side. And yes, 3 arguments would be ideal. 3, right? But you should, before you even write the essay, write your 3 points. You know, there's a part on the paper that you will be able to write any notes or what have you. Use that to jot down your 3 points. Take that time, jot down your 3 points, and the essay should be easier to write, because to come up with the arguments is actually the hardest part. Because once you know the structure, you'll be okay. But it's to know the content, you know, what arguments to actually present, right? And remember that you only have 250 to 300 words, and therefore you must ensure that you only include the relevant information. Those are not a lot of words, right? So you have to make sure that you're using your words efficiently. There's no such thing as an incorrect argument. I know it may sound a little weird, but please understand. As long as your argument is logical and it is adequately substantiated, you will be given the full credit, right? You'll be given the full credit. So don't worry if you have an argument that may sound, far-fetched. As long as you adequately substantiate it, and by substantiate, I mean you defend it. You back it up with evidence. Okay? There's no such thing as a wrong argument. You could tell me that murder is right, but you obviously have to explain how or give me circumstances in which murder would be okay, or murder would be right. Okay? So once you can do that efficiently, then you'll be given your full credit. So just bear that in mind. So when it comes to the structure, an argumentative essay requires 5 paragraphs. So you have an introduction, you have 3 body paragraphs representing the 3 arguments and a conclusion, right? So you have 5. Introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion, right? And of course, each paragraph has its own purpose and will contain specific information, which we'll get into right now. Now let's start with the introduction. After we've written our title, after we have our 3 points, right? And we've written our title, now we need to actually start to write the essay. Now our very first line will contain a hook. When I say hook, I don't mean what you use to catch fish. No. Well, there's a similar concept emerging from it, right? But the same way a hook will be used to catch fish, a hook in terms of writing is used to capture the reader's interest so that they would want to continue reading. When you start your essay, you want persons to continue reading. So if you have something that captures the readers or grabs the reader's attention from the start, then they're more likely going to be invested in your essay or argument or what have you, right? So this is why a hook is important. We need an attention grabber, right? So a hook can be any of the following: a quote, statistics, a rhetorical question, definition, or strong statement. And a rhetorical question would be a question for which no answer is expected, because you pose a rhetorical question to prove a point or to emphasize something rather than to get a response, okay? So once we've written our hook, then we include background information. So this is going to be 2 or 3 lines after your hook. So what is background information? So background information will refer to information that a reader requires to become aware of the topic. It also highlights the importance of the topic and its implications. This information includes, but is not limited to, historical facts, general views on the topic in discussion, or specific events, past or present, that make the topic relevant. Yes. So all those highlighted in red would represent elements that could be included in background information, right? So the background information is just information that the reader would need to become aware of the topic, okay? So when you introduce a topic, a person needs to know a little bit about it. You can't just, start writing as soon as you start the essay. A person will still need to know, okay, a little bit about the topic, right? Before you get to your specific points or your specific line of argument. So that you're building it up to that point, right? Oftentimes students start the argumentative essay and they already started giving their opinion. No, not yet. So you start with your hook, your attention grabber. Then the next 2 to 3 lines are going to be background information. So you're introducing the topic, right? And then the very last line of your introduction is going to be your thesis statement. Now, a thesis statement is just your position on the matter, right? It outlines what you set out to prove. Therefore, you will list your 3 arguments here. So you list them there. And note well, you should have an argumentative thesis because at the end of the day, it is an argumentative essay. Therefore, you should use modal verbs like should, must, etc. Right? So those verbs indicate obligation, right? So it will be useful to use those as part of your thesis statement. So your thesis statement is just going to be your position. So in your thesis statement, you're going to have, well, you're going to have the 3 reasons why you oppose or support the line of argument, whatever that may be, okay? And of course, I'm going to give an example of all these at the end, right? But your introduction, you start with your hook, you then proceed to background information, and then you end off with your thesis statement. So those are the 3 elements that are necessary in an introduction. Oh, okay, yeah. Right. Now we move on to the body. Now, the body is going to have 3 paragraphs, and these 3 paragraphs represent the 3 points that you introduce, that you would have introduced in your introduction, right? So another important thing, the argument should be presented in the same order as they were presented in the thesis statement. Okay, so if in your thesis statement you presented the arguments in this order, okay, so you said the death penalty should be abolished because X, Y, and Z. And of course, the letters just represent the reasons, right? And you give your reasons in that particular order, X, Y, and Z. So when you come to the body, your first body paragraph should be dealing with point X. And your second body paragraph should be dealing with point Y. And then your third body paragraph should be dealing with point Z, because X, Y, Z, right? So it has to conform to the same order. Now, each paragraph will commence with a topic sentence. And if you don't know what a topic sentence is, this is the first sentence of every body paragraph, and it tells the reader what the paragraph will be about. Okay? So the argument that you would have presented in your thesis statement, you would pretty much present it again at the beginning of the paragraph, right? Because that paragraph is going to be addressing that particular argument, right? So that's what we call a topic sentence. It's going to be the first sentence in the body paragraph, right? Now, it's important that you use transition words and phrases so that there is smooth transition between arguments. So, and examples would include firstly, secondly, etc., right? Yeah, right. And the topic sentence must be followed by supporting evidence, right? So supporting evidence would be anything used to back up the claim made. You can't just say, okay, the death penalty should be abolished because it is cruel, but you don't include any details to back that claim up. We need to know, why is it cruel, right? And there are a variety of techniques that we can use to support our arguments, right? And these are the following. So examples, illustrations, explanations, analogy. Now, an analogy will be a comparison between 2 things, typically for the purpose of explanation or clarification. So an example of an analogy would be growing a plant or growing trees would be like raising a child. You know, both of them are different, of course, but they're similar in some form. Otherwise, there would be no grounds to compare them, right? So you can say that growing a tree is similar to raising a child in the sense that you have to feed it, you have to look after it and give it adequate sunlight, well, give it adequate nutrition in order for it to grow. The same can be said for a child. You have to feed it and you have to give it adequate nutrition if you want it to grow, right? So in that sense, they're similar. Yes, they're different, but if I want to just draw, if I just want to show to explain a certain aspect of something, I could use an analogy. So I'm comparing two things that are actually different, but can be similar in some form or fashion, right? Just like I gave you just now with raising a child and um growing a tree, right? Or growing trees. Okay, statistics. Now, statistics, facts, research, those will all come under the same bracket. Of course, those are going to be very important if you are making a claim, right? But if you're going to use any of these, then you must use some form of authority to support that. So you can't just say, okay, um, that that diabetes is the leading cause of deaths worldwide. Even if you may think that's common sense, you should still mention some form of authority, whether that be the World Health Organization, the CDC, what does the CDC stand for again now? Um, Centers for Disease Control, right? Some sort of authority, right? And if you're going to use research, then of course you need to state, well, who conducted the research. We wouldn't expect you to be able to write all the details, but you need to have you need to at least mention the entity that performed the research, okay? Otherwise, you would just be seen as making these things up. And anybody could come up with figures or statistics just to seem like they have done some research, but no, actually use some form of authority, okay? Now, if you can remember the specific information, that's great too, right? But yeah. Rhetorical question, yes, that's a good way of using support. That's a good technique of supporting evidence, right? Because it gets you to think. I remember rhetorical question is not posed to get a response. It's more to emphasize a point or to prove a point, right? And quotes, yes, you can you can use what was said by someone, right? If you don't remember who said it, then you can say it was said that and but if right, it was said by a respected person in whichever field it is, and then you say what they said, right? Because you won't always remember who said what. And it could also be a case where, people you would see quotes from a person, but they're actually not the person who came up with that quote. So if you're not sure, just say it was said by um, a well-respected person in the field or what have you, right? So, right, that was our body. So our body is going to start with the topic sentence, which would be the point that you introduced in your thesis statement, followed by supporting evidence, right? And you can also employ more than one of these techniques, right? You're not confined to only one. You can use more than one. Whichever technique is suitable to you to help you back up your claim made. Depending on your argument, you may find that one may be more appropriate than another. But you can use more than one. The conclusion. And ironically, sometimes this is the hardest part to write for a lot of students, right? So what should be in our conclusion? So in our conclusion, we need to start with a restatement of our thesis. So what we would have said in the last line of our introduction, we need to say it again, but this time we need to reword it. So it should be in a different order and in different words, right? So once we've done that, the next 1 to 2 lines can be used to summarize or provide the central message emerging from the arguments, right? So the next 1 to 2 lines after we have restated our thesis, we will use that to write or state a general message emerging from the 3 points. Yes, we know that the 3 points will be different, but there's always some idea that can be extracted from the 3 points as a whole, right? And then the very last line, last line of your conclusion is going to be your final thoughts or concluding remarks. And this is how the essay will be brought to an end. So these concluding remarks can be any one of the following. It could be a call to action. Now, a call to action is going to be encouraging, is going to be where you encourage persons to take action about a problem. It could be a prediction, or it could be a recommendation, right? Any of those would be suitable for your final conclusion. Any of those would be suitable to end the argumentative essay. And do not introduce any new arguments. Yes, so when you're writing your conclusion, please don't insert a point that you just thought of when you were ending the essay. No new information should be in the conclusion, unless you're talking, unless it's the concluding remarks, which obviously would be either call to action, a prediction, or recommendation. But otherwise, no. Avoid cliches like in conclusion, as there are many alternatives such as overall, to sum everything up, ultimately, and to recap. Yes, in conclusion is very cliche. And the thing about in conclusion is that if you're reading an essay, everyone is going to know when you are concluding because they can see that it will be your final paragraph. With a speech, it's a little different because no one will know when you're actually going to conclude. So in conclusion would be okay, would sound better with a speech. But when it comes to writing, we're going to know that you're concluding because it's going to be your final paragraph. So it's better to use an alternative, and you have about 4 right here that you can use, okay? Alrighty. Alrighty, so now we're going to actually proceed to an example. So example 1. So these are some instructions these are instructions that you would typically be given. So your answer in this section should be approximately 250 to 300 words in length. You must write in standard English. Write your answer on the rule pages provided. You are expected to adhere to the word limit. There's a blank page for any notes you may want to make. This will not be marked. In your answer, you will be assessed on clarity, organization, and development of your argument. Correctness B, correctness of grammar, sentences, paragraphs, vocabulary, spelling, and punctuation. Okay, so the line of argument. Too many accidents are caused by careless young drivers. Write an essay giving your views on this statement. By the way, the argumentative essay is 25 marks now because it's 25 marks because this year was before the change. I can't remember which year it was, whether it was 2019 or 2018 that they changed up the format, not the format, but the they changed a few items on when it came to English A. So this is actually 25 marks now, right? All right, so here's my essay, right? So as you see, I started with the title and I use a general topic, the dangers posed by young drivers. Okay, so I start with my hook. There's a very good reason vehicle insurance is more expensive to obtain as a younger person. That's my hook. So that's what I use to grab the reader's attention, right? And it's a pretty strong assertion, right? Now I proceed to background information. So I'm going to introduce the topic. Young people are vulnerable because of inexperience and risky behaviors that are sometimes only practiced by them, right? So that would be background information. It is talking about how young people are at risk, generally how they are at risk, right? Now I'm going to get into my actual thesis, the three arguments that I'm going to present um, in this essay. Therefore, it is true that too many accidents are caused by young, careless drivers because they are likely to drive intoxicated. That's point one. They are susceptible to peer pressure. That's point two. And they are often distracted by their smartphones. That's point three. So you see that in the last line of my introduction, I have included the 3 points, and you can see them, right? So I started with my hook, then I proceeded to my background information, and then I ended with my thesis statement. Okay? Right. Now it's time to deal with my first point. Firstly, young people are more likely to drive under the influence as they enjoy the party culture. So you see, that's my topic sentence for my first point, because my first point was talking about driving intoxicated, right? So that will be my topic sentence, right? Now I will have to defend that by providing evidence. This culture involves partying into the early hours of the morning. It also involves the consumption of alcohol. These are activities that are guaranteed to compromise one's ability to drive competently. As a result, many accidents are caused by drunk driving, especially in the early hours of the morning. Now, those are, now that's an explanation as to why young people are likely to drive under the influence, right? So I explain that afterwards, right? Secondly, so I introduce my second point, not introduce, but the topic sentence for the second point. Secondly, peer pressure is the big reason for reckless driving among young people. This is because teenagers want to be accepted by their peers. The pressure to conform is enormous at this stage of their lives as they are in the process of maturation. So you see that this is an explanation, right? For example, a teenager that is driving with his friends will drive fast to show them that he has no fear of risk. Now, this would be an example. So you see, in this second point, I would have employed two techniques. I would have used explanation, right? So I use that I would have used explanation and and example. So explanation and example. In the second point. Three, and lastly, young people are often distracted by their smartphones when they drive. So that's my topic sentence. Many teenagers are addicted to their smartphones to the extent that they are unable to function without them. Consequently, many will respond to text messages while driving. This will make it impossible to concentrate and a road accident will be imminent. Okay? So this will be explanations, right? And we come to our conclusion. Overall, young drivers are especially careless due to distractions, drunk driving, and pressure from friends. So you realize that that's the same statement I introduced at the end of my introduction, but it is reworded. You see, the order has been changed. So in the introduction, I would have started with the drunk driving. This time I started with distractions, and I changed up the wording. So in the conclusion, I said distractions, and in the introduction, I said by smartphones. Drunk driving is the same thing as driving intoxicated, and pressure from friends would be same thing as peer pressure, right? So you see that I reworded the thesis statement, right? Okay, now I will provide a central message emerging from the arguments. Young drivers are always a risk due to their actions and attitudes. Now, those 3 points can literally be summed up in that statement, that they're always a risk due to their actions and attitudes drunk, driving intoxicated is an action, peer pressure and distraction. All of these either constitute an action or an attitude. So that's why I said you can always write something, you can always provide a statement that either summarizes everything or provides a central message, right? So yeah, and then we conclude with our final remarks. And I stated, therefore, it is crucial that reckless behavior is addressed and punished accordingly. Right? So that's like a recommendation. Right? So this would be, I think these were 295 words. Right? So that would be example 1. Now we're going to go into a second example. I'm not going to read the instructions, of course, because you would have seen the instructions in the last example, but I'm going to read the line of argument. Government should offer free healthcare for everyone residing in the country, nationals and non-nationals alike. Write an essay either supporting or opposing this view. And once again, it's actually 25 marks because this was before the change was made. All right, so you see this time I would have constructed my title as a question. Should healthcare be free for everyone in the country? Now I begin with my hook. Healthcare is easily one of the most expensive services. Yes, strong statement. The proposal to introduce free healthcare has always been opposed by the medical fraternity due to the threat of reduced earnings. Conversely, proponents maintain that healthcare is a human right. So from the proposal to a human right, that would represent my background information, right? And I would have given the general views on the topic in discussion. However, governments should provide free healthcare for everyone in the country because it will boost the economy, prevent death and minimize suffering, and promote equality. So you see my 3 points. Boost the economy, point 1. Prevent death and minimize suffering, point 2. And promote equality, point 3. So firstly, free healthcare will benefit the economy through increased productivity. Okay, so that's my topic sentence for the first point. A society cannot be productive if its people are not functioning at optimal levels. Therefore, health and productivity are inextricably connected, which means that one cannot exist without the other. For example, during the coronavirus pandemic, many persons had to quarantine due to illness, and naturally this resulted in a loss of productivity, which negatively affected the economy. So you see that? So in this example, my supporting evidence would have been an explanation and an example, right? Secondly, many deaths can be prevented and suffering can be minimized. Excuse me. Right, so that's my topic sentence for point 2. Non-communicable diseases like cancer and diabetes are on the rise, are very prevalent in society, and this can be easily demonstrated by the World Health Organization. So I use some authority, right? Which would be the World Health Organization or WHO. These diseases require continuous treatment, which is expensive, and many persons cannot afford it. This means that many persons either die prematurely or suffer excessively because they are unable to access treatment due to cost. Is that not unfortunate? Okay, so you see, in this point, I would have used explanation and a rhetorical question. Thirdly, free healthcare would promote equality as it would be more affordable for everyone regardless of their socioeconomic status. All right, so that's my topic sentence. Many persons of lower means are disadvantaged due to the high cost of healthcare. If every person is supposed to be equal, then free healthcare surely eliminates classism. And this is discrimination on the grounds of class, of course. It is a step towards inclusivity. So that's explanation. That's an explanation. All right. This is the conclusion. To sum everything up, free healthcare should be provided because it reduces death, okay, fosters equality, and benefits the economy. Once again, those would have been the 3 points that I would have used in my introduction, but in my conclusion, they are restated in a different order and in different words. Free healthcare is an investment that will yield excellent returns. That's an idea that will emerge from all 3 of the arguments that I presented. Because boosting the economy, preventing death and suffering, and promoting equality, you can consider those investments in a society, right? So that would be a central idea that emerges from the 3 points. And my concluding remarks, it is imperative for governments to consider the advantages of such a policy, right? That's a recommendation, yeah, that I used to bring the essay to an end. And that was 300 words, right? 300 words. All right. So that brings us to the end of this discussion. I hope that this was helpful. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.